All right. Welcome to the Flow Driven CEO podcast, where we're talking about life, leadership, business, entrepreneurialism, anything that goes. And today or this evening for me, 12 o'clock, 12 p.m. in Paris for Charity Von Guinness. Sorry, I nearly didn't get your surname right then, Charity. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Bee. It's awesome to be here and to learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I'm so keen to learn more about what you're doing because already in terms of what I've been, doing a bit of homework on you, we have so much to talk about in terms of just your whole journey and, what you're doing now and even like right this very second in terms of you just almost packed up everything or you packed your home up and you're now traveling for, I think you said the next 2 years as well, which sounds like an amazing trip of a lifetime. But look, firstly, I want you just to kind of give us a bit of a backstory about you and, your business now and yeah, what you're up to.
Yeah, so I spent about 25 years in the art world, and I think most people that are drawn to the art world and artist studios tend to be a little more on the nonconformist side, in unorthodox thinking ways. And after that, I really decided at the age of 44 to start my own business. And I think that was really predicated on a lot of things that are coming out in quantum sciences, and really understanding how critical the importance of artists are. Um, I found myself just getting a little burnt out with the art world because it very much centers objects instead of what the real value of artists is, which is their unorthodox perspectives, their ability to push back on limitations and imposed order that have been created, and to be able to create these entirely new worlds, and be able to self-author. So I wanted to really recenter in certain ways art and artists, as really the way forward in how we're going to move as a species entirely. And this journey is also really about the fact that, we have created this imposed order on things, and whether that's borders or economies or how we're understanding time, which I've talked about. I've really been asked to move in the way that I believe, which is that we are all one, we are all interconnected, and the world doesn't have borders. That we need to be fluid in our understanding of ourselves and the world and everything else. So.
I love that. There's so much to unpack here. Like this gets me so excited. Like, not conforming, something that we've had a little side chat about, but just, and we've got a bit in common in terms of that whole, I come from a creative background as well. Obviously not an artist but, from a creative comms background. And, it is relentless. And I've seen, the creatives I've worked with that they put their heart and soul into everything and then kind of it's critiqued and I'm not comparing this to artists as such but it is taxing and it can ultimately at times burn you out and I've also experienced that whole burnout piece but what I love hearing from you around is this kind of interconnectedness and you mentioned this, you haven't mentioned it yet, but I have been, like I said, it's you talk around this transformation from the edge and, and that we ultimately can thrive, if you like, in chaos. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and kind of how that fits into everything you've just been, in terms of your business and the way forward?
Yeah, so I think I'm not the only one that senses this, but I do feel like as a species and a society and, the cultures that we've created over the last 2,500 years. We're really at a threshold moment right now. And I think a lot of that is motivated by more quantifiable evidence that is coming out, certainly, and our understanding of things that we may have taken more for granted, whether that be, the laws of physics, just how we perceive things. We're really understanding, you know, in terms of how we even define time, we can only see as humans 0.0035% of light.
Mm,
And when we understand how limited our perspectives are, we start to understand there are things that we cannot see and other things at play. And some things that we've been told aren't necessarily true. So, in regards to our perception of light, we're also seeing in quantum sciences, quantum mechanics particularly, laws of physics being just totally thrown out the window. I mean, we're seeing tangible things like hydrogen, like plastics, defying gravity. And I bring up these two, light and gravity, because they are how we've defined time. When you think about planets that are so, so far away, we stop using mileage and start using or kilometers, or whatever your mode of metrics is, and start using light years,
mm,
because that is how we define time. So I think, as we start to see a lot of these theories coming out, and this is no longer the realm of the spiritual or the mystic. I mean, this is being quantified at this point,
mm,
so who are we going to look to when a lot of these, whether it's the laws of physics, time, our understanding of chaos, the void, start to crumble,
mm,
where our very reality is thrown into question. And for me, the answer to that is it's not going to be the politicians and the leaders who have been, benefiting from these systems. It's going to be artists who
mm,
have been living in this world already. I mean, they are world creators.
mm,
So that has been just something that I really see as a a needed future gap that we're going to have here when these realities start falling away. Where do people go?
mm,
Where do people look? And so that was really the motivator for this sacred outlaw temple, is this recentering of art and artists, and then also giving people the empowerment to know we are all creatives,
mm.
and that is
Yes.
actually our birthright.
Yeah.
You know, it is our birthright. And it's going to be the only way through the chaos, which is, inevitably going to be part of the dismantling of our reality. So I know these are really big things, and I hope I'm not sounding doomy or
Okay.
scary, but I
I
know.
Yeah, I totally get the whole chaos piece, and like you could say that it's like VUCA, right? It's volatile, it's ambiguous, it's complex. And I even with my own business, and I get looked upon at times like Bee Formless. What do you mean by that? And so I totally understand what you're talking about in terms of, in my simplest way of how I explain it, is like we're going from one fixed form, which is where we've, always been told you need to be like this and you need to do it this way and that way. But what happened to me was I burnt out behaving and being like that because it was restricting my creativity. And when you say everyone's a creative, I could not agree more, but yet I was kind of being pigeonholed, or, and to a degree I kind of allowed it, sort of thing. And so for me, it's kind of my analogy is it's going from that fixed form into that formless, shapeless, timeless, limitless, like water to then come out in another form. And so for me, that is what I take from even what we're talking about right now, because that's what we should be doing in terms of redefining and reshaping what the future looks like, because it feels like, and everything is up for grabs at the moment. You only have to look at, AI and everything that's coming in and what's going on a political global scale. It's almost like everyone is holding on for dear life, wanting to know that everything is there's an outcome and there's so much certainty. But what is certain at this point in time? Not a lot.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, your idea of formlessness is probably the greatest asset because we have to start thinking almost in inversion, kind of counterintuitively, because where we have defined or found security, you think of like consistency of form, like you're talking about, um, that we have ownership, we have these houses, these sanctuaries, um, that these things are actually more restrictive
Mm,
and limiting than who we truly are. They are almost in a certain way imprisoning. And I think, we're kind of telling the same story of this fluidity and formlessness in different ways, with me moving through the world and just coming up with titles for who I am and myself that don't exist. And I think this is going to be what we're all going to be called to do, whether we start doing it now or, we're forced into it later. But I think, this is really going back to, the origins of humanity.
mm.
We were nomadic. We were moving. I mean, this is why babies are soothed by, being rocked and walked or put in a car and move because that means we're moving somewhere better. We're moving somewhere safer. And we need to start to get back to these original ways of being because how we've defined certainty, security, form, I think are really going to be upended. And it's important, especially when you're moving through something transformational or chaotic, um, to be fluid, adaptable, flexible, formless. And those are actually our natural states of being. They
Yeah,
go back to, our origins. So I think, I would just encourage people to, whether it's you or, some of the container I'm building that, there are ways to kind of deprogram and be able to get back into that inner wisdom that we have and how to move through the world and that, what we've been told is security isn't really the security that security is
no.
found within us.
Well,
It isn't
exactly like
external.
I think we've been so ingrained to look from it from the outside, like externally. And like you're talking about, it's that interconnection. It's interconnecting with yourself, mind, body, soul, like the whole lot, quantum physics, energetically, the whole lot. And unless you're interconnected, how can you actually be able to then, go forward and reshape and that kind of whole being that limitless and everything else, which takes me to a question with regards to, so you're obviously working with artists and you talked around centering these artists. So in terms of the sorts of people or the artists you work with or partner with, are they at a point in time where they're stuck, or like how do you yeah, what's your starting point with the artists in terms of where they're at, and then how are you working with them to, I guess, crack them? Is it cracking them open? Like, how do you, I guess, programming them?
Well, I think I'm working with artists more as leaders of the new paradigm. I mean, the container that I've created is really for leaders and organizers of communities
Mm,
to be able to then resource both with one another and from artists to be able to look at what are some creative ways artists have solved for um, water pollution or, I think people, it was so funny. I was listening to a Neil deGrasse Tyson podcast recently. And the particular theoretical physicist he was interviewing works with artists a lot. And Neil deGrasse Tyson was like, well, this is new. Artists are interested in science. And I was just chuckling to myself because they've always been
yeah,
interested in science. Like they've
yeah,
been doing this
yeah.
work. Um, so of course they're a natural inclusion to this theoretical physicist, explanation to the general public. I mean, they make a lot of these complex ideas very accessible.
Mm,
So I think this is really about breaking down silos, mostly, and being able to gain inspiration from creatives, from
mm,
poets, from visual artists, from performers, so that these leaders, community organizers, social justice organizers can really gain from the, the more unorthodox thinking that creatives and artists bring to things, because we are really that is what we need.
mm.
We can't rely on old ways of thinking. They're going to have to be brand new. So
That's
I think it's
exciting.
really yeah. I'm sorry.
I was saying that, see, for me, that's where, I talk about this limitless or endless possibilities. And that's for me where when we actually take the blinkers off and we give ourselves the ability to reshape what, the future looks like. And that where everyone is, a creative, the sorts of problems that we can solve as a collective is like huge, right? It's not locked into this, well, you fix this problem, you fix this problem, and you fix this problem. And I think that is ultimately still very much the problem and why we're not getting to the solves as fast as we should be. And that we're stuck in this disconnected world, if you like. It's more disconnected than ever. And that's not just because of technology, it's just because of just the way we're operating, and it's no longer viable or sustainable.
Mm, yeah. Yeah, and I mean, this is going right back to that formlessness. When you don't have silos and frameworks and borders and, distinguishments between science, math, art, literature, that all of these things are being melded together, the the potential for solving, for possibility, just exponentially increases because you're drawing from all different sources and you're able to see the common thread between
Mm,
all of them. I hope sooner rather than later, dance, math, they're taught together. Like all of these things become understood as parts of a whole that are all serving one purpose, and we can draw from everything to be able to solve these problems. And I know, there's some good examples of places doing this, and I know Google gives a lot of funding to the Moonshot Factory and
Yeah.
some other things, which is all about, interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary teams approaching challenges together. But um, I'm hoping to just see more and more and more of that, because some of the people that have bigger influence within their communities and will be able to design what these cultures and regions and neighborhoods and, communities look like, that they have access to all of these things and can really work with artists to build new worlds, to build new communities, and do that as a co-creation process with the community, with their neighborhoods. So I think this is a this is a really exceptional time, and it's going to be, interesting to see what happens. But I've just felt like people need a place to go,
Mhm.
to um, be able to connect and network and resource together, because the people that are making these significant changes, what we don't want is this old burnout model,
No.
you know.
No, and it's not sustainable, and that's how I feel, like because it's just not. And you're, no doubt you get a bit of resistance around, what your purpose and mission is and what you're doing. Because I certainly do at times. It's like just conform a bit more. If you go back, if you kind of, and I know you've got to take people on the journey, but there's also this element of taking those calculated risks because the more we stay stuck and the more we hold on for dear life, which is essentially what we're doing, to a form that is no longer, for me, viable or sustainable, um, the longer it's going to take us to get there. And you raised it before actually, and you said whether you're, kind of going through, and I love this transformation on the from the edge, because literally that's what happened to me. I literally jumped off the edge of the cliff, so to speak, when I, hit my burnout, and that was it. And I was at the bottom, and I was just like, what the actual, I have no idea what this looks like. And then it's just been the biggest journey. And I'm so grateful for it though. Like it was like probably like you, I've had moments of just like that was hell. Didn't enjoy that at all. But the formlessness of it all and just this shaping and reshaping and shaping and reshaping. I feel like not ahead of time, but I do feel like I'm well positioned in kind of into more of that space and place where I'm more and more comfortable with it every day. And then what I see around me is I'm starting to see or notice a lot more of, oh, that's where I was, but that's where I was a few years ago when I crashed and burned. And I'm seeing more of this crashing and burning of people because the place and what they thought was safe externally is no longer safe in terms of it's got to you've got to go back within and secure everything and reconnect everything within. And I'm not sure if I'm making sense here. I could just be but that's really interesting for me from a society, community, business as well. Like I just think that there's kind of almost like these two worlds, and so how do you merge the two? There's people that are like you and I probably over this. Well, we're certainly over, moving into a different space and place and what it looks like. And then you've got this other lot here that are like, no, I'm not going near that. That's crazy. What are you doing? And then you've got this other group that's kind of sitting in the middle, like, oh, that looks really interesting, but oh, I keep getting pulled back. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to say you were perfectly clear. You're making total sense.
Oh, thank
I,
you.
I think that. Great articulation. Yeah, and I wanna just name too. I think, what we're both doing is a little more what people would call radical.
Yes.
Um, and the etymology of that word is actually just root, because we're trying to address the root, not
Yeah.
the symptoms. Um, but it's also uncomfortable because, these are pioneering
Mm.
spaces. And it's difficult to be some of the first to make movements out of old systems because you spoke to the enormous risk. And that usually comes from a moment like you spoke of, where it's like a rock bottom kind of
Mm.
situation. And I think, you know, as we move through some of those, and I have had countless dark nights of the soul, so to
Yeah.
speak,
I was going to say that earlier.
and
It's certainly a dark night of the soul.
yeah, but the more you can see that and understand that, what my friend Grace calls it curriculum. It is the teachings that are within uncertainty, and I think that is, a lot of coming back to this whole theme we've been talking about is the greatest skill is that navigating uncertainty. And when things do feel so unknown, and this speaks to the chaos, chaos is uncertainty, the unknown, we don't know what's happening. Being able to ground and understand how to navigate this, because a lot of our inability to navigate uncertainty and chaos is how we define form, security, stability, consistency. And when those things are stripped away, which is what chaos does, um, how are we able to maintain
Mm.
some level and sense, to see beyond what we've been told, and to be curious enough to question, why did I think, this was true? Or do I really think this is true? And be enamored with those questions and not anxious with them, like, oh my God,
Yeah,
my
totally.
whole reality is falling apart.
I think, and I actually think it's like you say, stepping into that curiosity, being completely open-minded to the unknown, and like I hate saying the word fearless, but like rather than being fearful, it's how do you, that being brave, that having the courage to go, okay, well, I have no idea what this looks like at all, but there's no going backwards for me now. And so what does it look like? And, I've in the past talked around chaos, but how do you organize yourself around that chaos? And I think there's something in that to have the ability to, when you're in chaos, is there's this ability to probably goes back to your grounding piece. So how do you ground yourself so that you do have some sort of, dare I say it, structure that enables you to keep that formlessness happening, like, kind of just going on, like it's like water, like the way water, you pour a glass of water out and it just goes into all these different shapes and spaces and places. And, it doesn't just land in one spot, does it? Like you pour a glass of water in there. I'm always trying to catch where all the water's gone. It's the same sort of thing, I think. And I've been exploring, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but I've been exploring a bit around anti-fragility, which has been around forever in a day, but it's interesting around how do we how do we create these anti-fragile systems so that we have this ability to, when in adversity or when in chaos and complexity and the unknown, how do we build these anti-fragile systems so that we are able to move forward in a way that is is growth. It's, regenerative. It's taking us forward. So I think that's really interesting as well, because we talk a lot about resilience, and resilience for me feels very much, the more I think about it now, and even for my own journey, it feels like resilience feels like it's part of that old world where we just always bounce back. You always bounce back, but you don't actually change anything. Do you know what I mean? You just bounce back from whatever's happened, but you go back to the way you've always been. That's just my latest analogy
Hmm.
observation. Mm.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, resilient, just words in general, I think are always tricky because they get co-opted.
Yeah.
And I think I've talked about this a lot with resilience. I think we can reclaim that word, and I think, anti-fragility may be, a way for you to explain it. But I think regardless, what it all boils down to is what you were saying, like, what is your container?
Mm, mm,
It's going to look different for everybody, but it's the container that you create of safety,
mm.
basically. And that, whether that looks like, practices around compassion and curiosity, if it's rituals you do, if it's, but I think the one thing I will say is I would hope, as in whatever container and structure people are building for themselves to move through chaos with adaptability and flexibility, that it includes connection, that our container has to,
Interconnect.
it's not a solo endeavor. Yeah, it is not a solo endeavor.
Yeah. Could not agree more. And I almost feel like, I'm meeting so many fascinating people on doing this pod, and just even like we've only met twice, and just meeting you, and it's just almost like that's a connection in itself, right? And you're, based on the other side of the world. I'm based here in Australia, and yet it just feels like it almost feels like we were meant to connect, like in a way that it's kind of funny. Funny is not the right word, but because it isn't meant to be done solo, and it's what we're doing isn't meant to be done solo. So, when you meet people, from the same tribe or whatever, that's also that kind of really does enrich in the connections, because it can be lonely when you are pioneering and doing something. You said the word radical earlier, but it can be lonely because you're not like everybody else. You aren't the same. You're different, and that in itself is, it's, I don't even know how to explain that, but for me, it's great to be, from the journey I've been on, from now to where I am today. That was probably been one of the hardest parts is, well, who am I now and who am I connected to now? And look, I've got lots of connections and, family and friends and all of that sort of thing, but who am I truly connected to now with the person I am now? Because I'm not the same person I
Yeah.
was back then to now. I look the same, but I'm not the same person because my form's changed.
Well,
Mm.
yeah, and I think, what you're saying is so important because being able to articulate and define who you are, in this new way, who you are becoming, who you
Mm.
want to be, which is going to be vastly different from who you wanted to be, you know, 5 years ago, even, because your worldview has changed. But it's important to be able to articulate those things because then you send the signals out,
Yeah,
right? Then we find each other because we have clearly defined who we want to be,
yeah.
where we want to go, and how we're going to be moving through the world.
Mm.
And those signals are they're reciprocal.
Mm.
They are, a way for us to connect and build momentum so that we aren't alone and we aren't the crazies out, with a bullhorn, like, telling people
Yeah.
about the end of the world. Um, this becomes a more normalized way of being. And we have to do that together. Yeah, because if you're out there on the street with a bullhorn, people are not going to listen to you. They're going to dismiss you as insane. So,
Yeah, totally.
yeah,
100%. 100%. I have one quick question for you because I'm conscious of you taking up too much time, and I feel like we could talk for hours about all of this, and I'm sure we'll speak again. Traveling for the next 2 years. So packed your apartment up from you were based in, I can't remember where you were based in the USA. Sorry, where are you based? Where are you based again?
I was in Denver, Colorado. I'd
That's right.
been there for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as part of
So,
and so you're now traveling, did you say, is it 2 or 3 years, did you say?
you know, eh, eh, right now it's probably two. I will feel like I need to settle down a little bit, and not live out of two suitcases. But it was an enormous risk, and it's really been, just listening, to my own intuition. Was I sold my house. I sold, I mean, I've really upended 20 years of my life, down into two suitcases to move through the world. And I think this speaks back to, some of these more pioneering things, but I think, I'm doing this to show that it can be done,
Mhm.
right? That, you know, there are ways to find security, consistency, safety, this container, while also being in flux and moving around a lot. I'm going to be in Paris here until probably the end of June, and then moving on to Northern Africa and, back
Amazing.
to Europe and just all around. So
Yeah, I think you said Egypt.
yeah,
Oh, I thought,
but I think,
yeah, I thought you said Egypt as well. Like it sounded like
yeah. Yeah.
so incredible. Like what, like, yeah, sorry, keep going.
Oh no, but I mean, a lot of these places, and even in Paris, we're talking about the original inhabitants of Paris, which were the Parisi, which is where Paris gets its name, but they are of Druidic origin, from Ireland, the UK, more animistic traditions. But it's so important to look back at these things because they will be able to help inform
Yeah.
what is going forward. And so, I've been choosing very specific places where I know there are ancient traditions, ancient texts, ways of being, um, that are very cohesive with what's coming out with quantum sciences right now, um, in helping us navigate so that we have all of these things to pull from, whether it's, how some of the original inhabitants of Egypt and the temples of Isis and Hathor and some of the symbology, how this actually melds perfectly with a lot of what's coming out in quantum mechanics on frequencies and black holes and, string theory and all the rest. So I think, yeah, it's for me, the ultimate goal is that this will be a book, but also, this community that I'm building, and just something for people to reference to understand how this all correlates and comes together into, just really basic, beautiful, universal concepts that
Mhm.
we all can apply to our lives. And
Great.
that does require pulling from everything.
Yeah. And
So,
I
yeah.
love that. Charity. And I love the basic as well. Like, we add, but yeah, we just got to get back to basics. And that for me is that whole subtractive piece as well, right? Wow,
Yeah.
you are so amazing. Like I listen to you and I'm like, I wanted to go traveling, and you get me even more, you like inspiring. You're probably gonna roll your eyes at me, but it's great to connect with someone like you who is pioneering their way through, and I guess it keeps meeting people like you. It keeps me going in terms of what I'm pioneering and doing as well. And so I've absolutely loved chatting with you today. I know that you're on Substack. So where can we, and I'll share it in the notes, but where can we find out more about you, and where can we read more about and listen to your podcast as well? Where's the best place to find you?
Well, thank you, first of all, for your very generous words and offering. And I think so much of what you're doing and trying to make in the world is also so inspiring. And for me, traveling is just part of my story and journey. But I think you can anyone can be doing what I'm doing in multiple
Yeah,
ways.
yeah,
You don't have to be so extreme with uh, editing your life down to two suitcases. But where people can find me, yes, Substack. I really am trying to put out as much writing as possible. I have a podcast, Sacred Outlaw Temple, and then my business website is quantummutiny.com, and you can find out about some of the art activations we're doing in communities around the world, more about the Sacred Outlaw Temple and all the
amazing.
rest. So,
Amazing. Well,
yeah.
thank you. Thank you. Enjoy your afternoon in Paris or Paris. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, B. Hopefully we will talk again soon.
We definitely will. Take care. Thank you.